The storm came without warning that October night in 1868, rolling across the Texas plains like God's own fury. Rachel Morgan stood at her cabin window, watching lightning split the sky above the cottonwoods. The wind howled through the gaps in the timber walls, making the oil lamp flicker and dance on the rough-hewn table behind her. She'd grown accustomed to storms in the 3 years since Samuel's passing. The frontier had a way of stripping away fear, leaving only the bare necessities of survival. Still, something about this night felt different. Perhaps it was the way the horses in the corral pressed against the fence, or how even the coyotes had gone silent. Rachel pulled her shawl tighter and moved to check the door latch. Her fingers had barely touched the iron when a sound cut through the storm. Not thunder, but something far more unsettling. A pounding, desperate and rhythmic, against her door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The pounding came again, more urgent. Through the wind, she heard something that made her blood run cold, the thin, reedy cry of an infant. Rachel's hand moved to the Winchester propped beside the door. Living alone on the edge of civilization had taught her caution. But that cry, Lord help her. She knew that sound too well. Her own Emily had made such cries in those final, fevered hours 2 winters past. She lifted the latch. The door burst inward with the wind, and there he stood, a figure from every settler's nightmare, an Apache warrior, tall and fierce, his long black hair plastered to his skull by rain. Blood darkened his buckskin shirt, though whether his own or another's, she couldn't tell. But it wasn't the man that held her frozen, it was the bundle in his arms. "Please," he said in English, the word thick with an accent but clear enough. "Child. Dying." Rachel's eyes dropped to the bundle. Through the soaked rabbit fur wrapping, she glimpsed a tiny face, lips already tinged blue. The warrior's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw not the savage killer of frontier tales, but something achingly familiar, a parent's desperation. "Bring him in," she heard herself say. The Apache stepped inside, water pooling around his moccasins. Rachel pushed the door shut against the storm and turned to face her unexpected guests. In the lamplight, she could see the baby more clearly, no more than 3 months old, burning with fever, each breath a struggle. "Put him on the table," Rachel commanded, her mind already cataloging what she'd need. Willow bark for the fever, steam for the lungs, goat's milk if the child could take it. The warrior hesitated, clutching the bundle tighter. "I'm trying to help," Rachel said firmly. "But you must trust me." Something in her tone must have reached him. He laid the baby down with infinite care, his large hands gentle as a mother's. Rachel unwrapped the sodden furs, revealing the infant's body. Her heart clenched so small, so fragile, fighting for each breath just as Emily had. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, already moving to the stove to heat water. 2 days. My wife," the man's voice caught. "She is gone. The sickness took her. I thought the child would follow, but he fights. I heard—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I heard the white woman here knows healing." Rachel's hand stilled for just a moment. He'd risked everything coming here, not just the storm, but the very real possibility that she'd shoot him on sight or alert the town. The Apache wars had left too many graves on both sides for trust to come easy. "What's his name?" she asked, returning with warm water and clean cloths. "Nantan. It means spokesman in your tongue. My wife believed he would one day speak for peace between our peoples." The bitter irony in his voice was unmistakable. Rachel began bathing the child, her movements sure despite the years since she'd tended her own baby. "And your name?" "I am called Ellis by the whites. My true name is not for your people to speak." She nodded, understanding. Names held power, and trust was earned, not given. "I'm Rachel Morgan. Now help me get some of this willow bark tea into him." For the next hour, they worked side by side in unlikely partnership. Rachel showed Elias how to hold the baby's head while she spooned tiny amounts of medicine between the small lips. She set up a tent of blankets near the stove and filled it with steam from boiling water steeped with pine needles. The warrior watched her every move with intense focus, memorizing each action. "You have done this before," he observed. "Yes," was all Rachel said, but he must have heard the weight in that single word. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, a different kind of intensity held sway. The baby's breathing grew slightly easier, though he was far from safe. Rachel knew the next few hours would tell. "He needs milk," she said. "I have a goat out back, but—" A crash of thunder shook the cabin, followed immediately by another sound horses, many horses riding hard. Elias was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the knife at his belt. Rachel grabbed his wrist. "No," she said firmly. "If that's who I think it is, bloodshed will only make things worse." She moved to the window, peering out through the rain-lashed glass. Her heart sank. "It's Amos Dillard and his men. They must have seen you come here." She knew Dillard, a former Confederate soldier who'd brought his hatred west after the war. He'd lost a brother to Apache raiders and never missed a chance to repay the debt. With him rode 6 others, all armed, all with similar grudges. "Is there another way out?" Elias asked, already reaching for the baby. "You can't take him back into this storm. He'll die for certain." Rachel made a decision that would change everything. "Get behind the bed curtain. Stay quiet, no matter what happens." "I do not hide from such men." "You do if you want your son to live," Rachel shot back. "Now go." The pounding on her door began before Elias had fully concealed himself. Rachel took a breath, smoothed her hair, and opened it. Amos Dillard stood on her threshold, water streaming from his hat brim. Behind him, his men sat their horses, rifles prominent. Amos himself was a lean, hard man with eyes like chips of flint. "Evening, Mrs. Morgan," he said, though his tone held no courtesy. "We tracked an Apache to your door. Going to ask you to step aside while we conduct our business." "There's no Apache here, Mr. Dillard," Rachel said calmly. "Perhaps your tracker needs spectacles." Dillard's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, we followed his trail clear as day. Now, I understand you being scared, him forcing his way in and all, but we're here now. You're safe." "I said there's no Apache here," Rachel repeated. "What I do have is a sick baby I'm tending to. Now. Unless you want to explain to the town why you and your men burst into a widow's home in the middle of the night, I suggest you move along." "A baby," Dillard pushed past her, his men following. They filled the small cabin, bringing with them the smell of wet leather and whiskey. His eyes found the bundle on the table immediately. "That's no white child." "No," Rachel said, moving to place herself between Dillard and the table. "It's a child, period, and he's sick near unto death. Are you going to help me save him? Or are you going to stand there dripping on my floor?" "Where's his father?" Dillard demanded. "How should I know the baby was left on my doorstep? Probably by someone who heard I have healing knowledge." The lie came smoothly, surprising her. "In this storm, don't take us for fools. Woman." Dillard's hand moved to his pistol. "Jake, search the place." Rachel's mind raced. In moments, they'd find Elias and blood would flow. The baby on the table whimpered, a thin, weak sound that cut through the tension. "That child is dying," she said, letting real desperation color her voice. "I don't care whose child he is, Apache, Mexican, or the Queen of England's. No baby deserves to die because grown men can't put aside their feuds. Now either help me or get out, but decide quick because every second you waste brings him closer to his grave." Something in her words must have reached one of the men. "Amos," he said uncertainly, "it is just a baby." "It's an Apache baby," Dillard snarled. "Nits make lice. Tom, you know that as well as I do." The casual cruelty of the words ignited something in Rachel. "Then you'll have to shoot me too," she said. picking up the baby and cradling him against her chest. "Because I won't let you harm this child. Not in my home. Not while I draw breath." The cabin fell silent except for the storm outside and the baby's labored breathing. Rachel stood there, a lone woman facing 7 armed men, holding a dying Apache infant like a shield. Dillard's face twisted with disgust. "You'd stand with them against your own kind." "I stand with anyone who needs help," Rachel replied. "That's what makes us different from animals. Mr. Dillard, or at least it should." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Dillard spat on her floor. "This ain't over," he said. "You've chosen your side, Mrs. Morgan. Don't expect the town to forget it." He turned and stalked out, his men following reluctantly. Tom, the one who'd spoken up, lingered at the door. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you might want to think about leaving come morning. Amos holds a grudge something fierce." Then they were gone, thunder and hoofbeats fading into the night. Rachel's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand straight. Only when she was certain they were truly gone did she call out, "You can come out now." Elias emerged from behind the curtain, his face unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment, then at his son in her arms. "Why?" he asked simply. Rachel looked down at the baby, whose breathing seemed marginally easier. "Because I couldn't save my own," she said quietly. "But maybe I can save yours." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, but Rachel knew a different kind of tempest had just begun. Come morning, the entire settlement would know what she'd done. Amos Dillard would make sure of that. But for now, there was only a frontier cabin, a sick child, and 2 unlikely allies bound together by necessity and a fragile thread of hope. Rachel handed the baby back to his father and returned to her work, heating more water, preparing more medicine. "He's not out of danger yet," she said. "It'll be a long night." Elias nodded, settling himself on the floor near the stove with his son. "I will stay." "I know," Rachel said simply, and went to milk the goat. The first light of dawn was still hours away, but already the shape of things to come was forming, as inevitable as the sunrise, in saving one small life. Rachel Morgan had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but as she worked through the night, fighting death itself for the sake of an Apache child, she found she had no regrets. Some stands, she thought, were worth taking, whatever the cost. The morning after the storm dawned clear and cold, with that peculiar brightness that follows violence in the weather. Rachel had dozed fitfully in her chair, waking every hour to check on the baby. Little Nantan had survived the night, his fever breaking just before dawn. Now he slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle she'd fashioned from a produce crate and old quilts. Elias hadn't slept at all. He'd maintained his vigil on the floor, dark eyes following her every movement as she tended his son. Now, as sunlight crept through the windows, he finally spoke. "The child needs a steady source of milk. Your goat won't be enough long-term," Rachel finished. "I know. Mrs. Henderson in town has a milk cow that just calved. She might—" She stopped, reality settling like lead in her stomach. After last night, would anyone in town even speak to her, let alone help? As if reading her thoughts, Elias rose stiffly to his feet. "I have brought danger to your door. This was not my intention." "You brought a dying child to my door," Rachel corrected. The danger was already here, just wearing different faces. A knock interrupted them, soft, hesitant. Rachel tensed, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle. But Elias held up a hand. "One person, on foot," he said quietly. No threat. Still cautious. Rachel opened the door to find Miriam Blackwood, the minister's wife, holding a covered pot. "I brought soup," the older woman said, her kind face creased with worry. And I wanted to see, that is, Amos Dillard is telling quite a tale in town. Rachel stood aside. Come in, Mrs. Blackwood. See for yourself. Miriam entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Elias. But then her gaze fell on the baby, and her expression softened. Oh my, how tiny he is. Is he? He'll live, God willing, Rachel said. His fever broke this morning. Miriam set down her pot and moved closer to the cradle. May I? Rachel glanced at Elias, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Miriam gently touched the baby's forehead, checking for fever with the practiced hand of a woman who'd raised 6 children. He needs proper milk, she pronounced, and consistent warmth. This cabin's too drafty. She turned to Elias, studying him with frank curiosity. You're his father? Yes. And his mother? Dead. The single word carried volumes. Miriam nodded slowly. I see. She looked between Rachel and Elias, seeming to come to some decision. I'll speak to Mary Henderson about the milk cow. But Rachel, child, you need to understand what you've started here. Amos has half the town convinced you're harboring a war party. That's absurd, Rachel said. Of course it is, but fear makes people foolish. And there's plenty of fear to go around. Miriam pulled her shawl tighter. My Daniel will try to calm things, but his influence only goes so far. You might want to consider. I'm not turning them out, Rachel said firmly. I wasn't going to suggest that, but perhaps discretion, if the gentleman could avoid being seen. Elias made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. Hide like a coyote. This is what your Christian charity demands. Miriam flushed, but held her ground. It's what survival demands. Sir, for all 3 of you. After Miriam left, promising to return with milk and supplies, Rachel set about the morning chores with determined normalcy, but everything felt different with Elias's presence. He helped without being asked, hauling water and splitting wood with economical movements that spoke of a lifetime's practice. You don't have to do that, Rachel said as he stacked the split logs. I pay my debts, he replied simply. As the day wore on, the baby, whom Rachel found herself thinking of as Nathaniel, a proper Christian name that might ease the town's fears, grew stronger. He took goat's milk from a cloth teat, his tiny fingers grasping at air. When he cried, the sound was stronger, more demanding. He has his mother's spirit, Elias said, a ghost of a smile crossing his stern features. She would fight the wind itself if it blew wrong. It was the most he'd said about his wife. Rachel wanted to ask more, but sensed the wound was too fresh. Instead, she busied herself with practical matters, washing the baby's few clothes, preparing more medicine, avoiding the larger question of what came next. That afternoon, 2 more visitors arrived. Tom Garrett, the man who'd spoken up the night before, and surprisingly, Dr. Marcus Webb, the town's only physician. Heard you had a sick child out here, the doctor said gruffly, setting down his medical bag. He was a gray-bearded man who'd learned his trade in the war between the states and had seen too much to be easily shocked. Thought I'd better have a look. Rachel caught Tom's eye. Understanding. He'd fetched the doctor, probably against Amos's explicit orders. Doctor. Webb examined Nathaniel thoroughly, listening to his chest with a stethoscope, checking his eyes and throat. Elias watched like a hawk, tension radiating from every line of his body. Congestion's clearing. The doctor pronounced, You did good work. Mrs. Morgan, keep up with the willow bark tea and steam treatments. He'll need careful watching for the next week, but I believe he'll make it. He packed up his instruments, then paused. I'll be frank with you both. This child is maybe 3 months old. Without mother's milk or a wet nurse, his chances diminish considerably. Goat's milk will do for now, but... Mrs. Henderson has agreed to help, Rachel said quickly. We'll manage. The doctor nodded. See that you do. He turned to Elias. I lost my own son at Antietam. Confederate bullet took him 3 days before the war ended. Waste of a good boy." He cleared his throat. "What I mean to say is, I've had my fill of children dying for their father's wars. You keep that baby safe. You hear?" After they left, Elias stood at the window, watching their departure. "Your people surprise me," he said quietly. "Some would see my son dead for being born Apache. Others risk their standing to help. How do you tell the difference?" "You can't always," Rachel admitted. "Sometimes people surprise you, good and bad." As evening fell, she prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. They ate in companionable silence, the baby sleeping between them. It felt strangely domestic, this shared meal, like playing house with the wrong cast. "You had a child," Elias said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Rachel's hands stilled on her coffee cup. "A daughter, Emily. She lived 4 months. The words came easier than expected. "The whooping cough took her 2 winters ago. My husband Samuel followed a month later. Doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think it was heartbreak. I am sorry for your loss. And I for yours." Rachel met his eyes across the table. "What was her name, your wife?" "Morning Star. In your tongue." "She was Northern Arapaho, taken in a raid when she was young, raised Apache." His voice grew distant. "She could track deer better than any warrior, but she made our son laugh like spring water over stones." They shared their grief in the gathering darkness, 2 people who'd lost everything finding unexpected comfort in mutual understanding. When Nathaniel woke hungry, they tended him together. Rachel showing Elias how to test the milk's temperature, how to position the baby to prevent air bubbles. "You would have been a good mother," Elias observed, watching her gentle ministrations. "I was a mother," Rachel corrected softly. "For 4 months. I was the best mother I knew how to be." That night, she insisted Elias take the bed while she kept watch in the chair. He protested, but she held firm. "You haven't slept in 2 days. You're no good to your son dead on your feet." He capitulated with poor grace, but within minutes she heard his breathing deepen into sleep. Rachel sat in the lamplight, the baby cradled in her arms, and let herself imagine what she'd denied herself for 2 years the weight of a child. The sweet milk smell, the tiny fingers that curled around hers with instinctive trust. Dangerous thoughts. This child wasn't hers, couldn't be hers. In a few days, maybe a week, Elias would take his son and vanish back into the wilderness. She was just a temporary refuge, a port in a storm. But for now, in the quiet cabin with the night pressing close outside, she allowed herself this moment of borrowed motherhood. The next days fell into a pattern. Elias hunted, bringing back rabbit and deer to supplement their stores. Rachel tended the baby and maintained the fiction that she was alone when the occasional visitor came by. Most were sympathetic women, mostly, drawn by curiosity and compassion in equal measure. They brought small gifts, a knitted blanket, a rattle carved from bone, advice on teething and colic. But she also felt the weight of other eyes, hostile and watchful. Once, she found a note nailed to her door. "Apache lovers not welcome here." Another time, someone had killed one of her chickens and left it bleeding on her doorstep. "You should not suffer this for us," Elias said after the chicken incident. "I'm not suffering for you," Rachel replied, scrubbing the blood from her porch with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "I'm standing for what's right. There's a difference." He watched her work, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "You are unlike the white women I have known." "How many white women have you known?" she asked, attempting levity. "The ones who shot at me from wagon trains, the ones who screamed when we rode past, the one who—" He stopped abruptly. Rachel waited, but he didn't continue. Some stories, she understood, were too heavy for telling. That evening, as they performed their now familiar dance of baby care, Elias suddenly produced something from his possessions, a small leather pouch decorated with beadwork. "This was my wife's," he said, pressing it into Rachel's hands. "For protection, for strength." Rachel opened it carefully. Inside was a perfect eagle feather and a small piece of turquoise. "I can't accept this." "You already have," he said simply. "When you opened your door that night, you accepted more than you know." The gifts carried weight beyond their physical presence. Rachel understood she was being honored, brought into a circle of trust that few whites ever entered. She hung the pouch from a peg near the door, where it could watch over all who entered. As the week drew to a close, Nathaniel thrived. His cheeks filled out, his cries grew lustier, and he began to focus on faces with that intense concentration unique to babies. Rachel found herself narrating her activities to him, a habit from Emily's brief life that returned unbidden. "Now we're going to feed the chickens," she'd say, carrying him in a sling she'd fashioned. "They're silly birds, but they give us eggs, so we tolerate their foolishness." Once, she caught Elias smiling at her commentary. "You teach him well," he said, both languages. She hadn't realized she'd been mixing English with the few Apache words he'd taught her, mostly endearments and simple phrases. It felt natural, this blending of worlds in their small cabin. But the outside world wouldn't stay outside forever. On the 7th day, as rain clouds gathered again on the horizon, Miriam Blackwood arrived with troubling news. "Amos Dillard's called a town meeting," she said without preamble. "Tonight, he means to force the issue of your situation." Rachel felt ice in her veins. "What kind of force?" "The kind that carries torches and rope," Miriam said grimly. "Daniel will speak against it, but Amos has been working on people's fears all week. The recent raids to the south, the soldiers killed last month, he's stirring it all up." Elias stepped from the shadows where he'd been listening. "Then we leave now." "In daylight with a week-old baby," Rachel shook her head. "That's madness." "Staying is madness," he countered. They stood facing each other, the baby between them like a small, breathing question mark. Rachel felt the weight of choice pressing down safety in flight or danger in standing ground. But looking at Nathaniel, at his trusting sleep, she knew there was really no choice at all. "We stay," she said firmly. "This is my home. I've done nothing wrong, and neither have you. Running makes us look guilty." "Being dead makes us look dead," Elias said with grim humor. "Then we'd better make sure that doesn't happen." Rachel turned to Miriam. "What time is this meeting?" "After sunset, at the church." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there." "You can't," both Miriam and Elias spoke at once. "Watch me," Rachel said, steel in her voice that surprised them all. "They want to discuss my life. They can do it to my face." As Miriam left, shaking her head and muttering about stubborn women, Rachel began preparations. She heated water for baths, laid out her best dress, the black bombazine she'd worn to Samuel's funeral. If she was going to face down the town, she'd do it as a respectable widow, not a frontier hermit. "This is not wise," Elias said, watching her preparations. "Wisdom and I parted ways the night I opened that door," Rachel replied. "Now help me figure out how to carry Nathaniel so the whole town can see he's just a baby, not a threat." The sun was setting as they prepared for what might be their last night in the cabin. Rachel refused to think in those terms, but she saw Elias checking his weapons, noting exits, preparing for the worst. She finished dressing and turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You are a warrior," he said quietly. "My people would recognize you as such." "I'm just a woman trying to do right," Rachel replied, but she felt the truth in his words. Sometimes, she thought, that was its own kind of war. As darkness fell and the time for the meeting approached, Rachel picked up Nathaniel, feeling his warm weight settle against her chest. Whatever came next, she would face it standing tall. The town could accept them or reject them, but they couldn't make her ashamed of saving a child's life. "Ready?" she asked Elias. He nodded, and together they stepped out into the gathering night, toward whatever judgment awaited them. The weeks following the town meeting passed with an uneasy truce. Rachel had stood before the congregation that night, Nathaniel in her arms, and faced down their fears with quiet dignity. Reverend Blackwood's impassioned plea for Christian charity, combined with Dr. Webb's medical testimony about the baby's fragile health, had swayed enough hearts to prevent immediate violence. But the town remained divided, and Rachel felt the weight of watching eyes whenever she ventured out for supplies. Elias had wanted to leave immediately after the meeting, but Nathaniel's health wouldn't permit travel. The baby needed stability, warmth, and consistent nourishment. So they settled into an unconventional routine, Elias hunting and helping with heavy work, Rachel tending the baby and maintaining her small homestead, both of them navigating the strange territory between two worlds. It was during these weeks that their relationship began to shift from mere alliance to something deeper. The change started small. Elias began teaching her Apache words beyond the basics, not just language, but the stories behind them. As he worked, carving a wooden horse for Nathaniel with patient hands, he would speak of his people's ways. "This wood, from the mesquite tree," he explained one afternoon, his knife moving in sure strokes. "It's hard, but it bends before it breaks. Like the Apache, like you." Rachel looked up from her mending. "I'm not Apache." "No," he agreed, "but you have the spirit of one who survives." She found herself sharing her own stories in return, not just the tragedy of losing Samuel and Emily, but the earlier memories growing up in Ohio, learning herb lore from her grandmother, the dream that had brought her and Samuel west in search of land and freedom. "We thought we'd build something lasting," she said one evening, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of copper and rose. "A legacy for our children. Instead," she gestured at the small homestead, modest even by frontier standards. "You built more than you know," Elias said quietly. "This place gave my son life. That is a legacy worth having." As November arrived with its chill winds, their partnership deepened into genuine companionship. Elias still maintained some distance. He slept in the barn most nights, coming to the house only for meals and to help with Nathaniel. But the walls between them were slowly crumbling. The baby thrived under their shared care. At 4 months old, he was bright-eyed and quick to smile, responding equally to Rachel's English lullabies and Elias's Apache songs. He had his father's dark hair, but his mother's delicate features, creating a face that was heartbreakingly beautiful. "He will have questions one day," Elias said, watching his son grasp at a wooden rattle, "about who he is, where he belongs." "Then we'll tell him the truth," Rachel replied, "that he belongs to both worlds." The word "we" hung between them, unexamined but significant. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Mary Henderson, who had faithfully provided cow's milk despite community pressure, warned Rachel during one of her visits. "People are talking," she said, bouncing Nathaniel on her knee, "saying you've gone native, taken up with him improper-like." Rachel's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "People will always talk. I'm caring for a motherless child, nothing more." Mary's knowing look said she wasn't fooled. "Rachel, honey, I've seen how he looks at you. More important, I've seen how you look at him. Just be careful. The world ain't kind to those who love across battle lines." Love. The word stayed with Rachel long after Mary left. Was that what was growing between them in the quiet moments when their hands touched, passing Nathaniel between them? When Elias's rare smile transformed his stern features? When they worked in comfortable silence, anticipating each other's needs? One night, a norther blew in with unexpected force, sending the temperature plummeting. Rachel woke to Nathaniel's cries and found frost creeping across the inside of the windows. The baby was cold despite his blankets, his lips taking on a worrying blue tinge. She built up the fire and held him close, but he wouldn't warm. Panic clawed at her throat. She couldn't lose another child to the cold, couldn't bear it. Elias appeared in the doorway, summoned by the baby's cries. He took in the situation at a glance and made a decision. "Bring him," he commanded, leading her to her own bed. He pulled back the covers and gestured for her to get in with the baby. "Body heat," he explained tersely. "It's how we survive the mountain winters." Rachel didn't hesitate, climbing into bed fully clothed with Nathaniel against her chest. But it wasn't enough, the baby still shivered. Without a word, Elias lay down on the other side, creating a warm cave of their bodies with Nathaniel safe between them. It was the closest they'd ever been, separated only by the baby and layers of clothing. Yet Rachel felt the intimacy of it like a physical touch. "Tell him a story," Elias murmured. "Your voice calms him." So Rachel told the story of the wooden horse, how his father was carving it with loving hands, how one day Nathaniel would ride a real horse across the open land. Elias added his own voice, speaking in Apache, weaving their words together until they created a single narrative of love and hope. Gradually, Nathaniel warmed and settled, his breathing evening out into sleep, but neither adult moved. They lay there in the darkness, sharing breath and warmth, the baby a bridge between their separate worlds. "My wife," Elias said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "She died, protecting him. Soldiers came to the winter camp. She hid him in the rocks, covered him with her body. They found her, but not him." Rachel's throat tightened. She reached across Nathaniel to touch Elias's hand. "She was brave." "Yes," his fingers intertwined with hers. "As are you." They stayed that way until dawn, hands linked over the sleeping child, a makeshift family forged by necessity and something deeper than either dared name. The incident with the wooden horse came a week later. Elias had finally finished carving it, a beautiful piece barely bigger than his palm, with flowing mane and proud stance. He presented it to Nathaniel solemnly, as if bestowing a great honor. "When you are older," he told his son in both languages, "you will ride free like this horse, no fences, no boundaries." Watching him, Rachel felt her heart constrict. "You're thinking of leaving." He didn't deny it. "The weather grows cold. Soon the passes will be clear. It would be safer to go south, to Mexico maybe." "Safer for who?" Rachel asked sharply. "For you, or for a 5-month-old baby who needs stability?" "For you," Elias said quietly. "Every day we stay, you lose more. Your reputation, your standing in the town. Those things were lost the night I opened my door." Rachel interrupted. "I made my choice with open eyes." "Did you—" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Did you choose to have people spit when you pass, to have your chickens killed, your fences cut? How long before they do worse?" Rachel rose too, Nathaniel in her arms. "So your answer is to run to take him out into the wilderness in winter?" "My people survived the wilderness. Your people aren't 5 months old." They faced each other, anger crackling between them like lightning. Nathaniel, sensing the tension, began to fuss. "Look what we're doing," Rachel said, jiggling the baby soothingly, fighting over his head like he's a wishbone to be pulled apart. The anger drained from Elias's face. "You're right. You're scared," Rachel finished. "So am I. Scared of losing him. Scared of what comes next, but running won't solve anything." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes. The weight he carried. "What will solve it? Your town will never accept us." "Then we make our own place," Rachel said fiercely. "Here, on this land. We don't need their acceptance, just their tolerance." "We," Elias repeated, something wondering in his voice. Rachel flushed but didn't back down. "Unless you have other plans." He reached out, his fingers ghosting over Nathaniel's hair, then coming to rest on Rachel's cheek. "My plans died with my wife," he said roughly. "I thought I was just trying to save my son. I didn't expect—" "Neither did I," Rachel whispered. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Nathaniel decided he was hungry, breaking the spell with his imperious cries. They moved apart, returning to the familiar dance of childcare. But something had shifted irrevocably. Over the next days, Elias threw himself into improving the homestead. He repaired the barn roof, reinforced the chicken coop against predators, and dug a new well closer to the house. It was the work of a man planning to stay, not leave. Rachel watched him work, admitting to herself what Mary Henderson had seen weeks ago. She was falling in love with this quiet, complicated man who could track a deer for miles but handled his son like sponge sugar, who carried terrible losses but still found gentleness for small things, who saw her not as the widow Morgan or the white woman, but simply as Rachel. The test came, as tests always do, from an unexpected quarter. Rachel had taken Nathaniel into town for supplies, leaving Elias to work on the fence line. She was examining bolts of cloth when she heard a familiar voice, one that made her blood run cold. Well, well, Rachel Morgan. She turned to find her brother-in-law, Josiah Morgan, standing in the doorway of the general store. She hadn't seen him since Samuel's funeral, when he'd made it clear he blamed her for his brother's death. He was thinner now, harder, with the look of a man who'd been riding rough trails.
"Josiah,"
she managed.
"I didn't know you were in the territory."
"Lots you don't know," he said, his eyes fixing on Nathaniel with disturbing intensity.
"Heard some interesting stories about my brother's widow, taking up with savages, raising their spawn."
"Watch your tongue," Rachel said sharply, drawing Nathaniel closer. Josiah smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "Protective, ain't you? Like you were with Samuel. Oh, wait, he died under your care, didn't he? And little Emily, too." The words hit like physical blows. Rachel felt herself sway but forced steel into her spine. "Get out of my way, Josiah." "Not until we have an understanding." He leaned closer, whiskey harsh on his breath. "That land you're squatting on, it's Morgan land, family land, and seeing as Samuel's gone and you've proved yourself unfit, I'm thinking it's time you moved on." "That land is mine," Rachel said. "Samuel left it to me legal and proper." "Legal documents can be challenged, especially when the widow's shown herself to be of low moral character." His smile widened. "Leave voluntarily, or I'll make things difficult. Your choice." He tipped his hat mockingly and sauntered away, leaving Rachel shaking with rage and fear. She hurried through her purchases and drove home faster than safe, Nathaniel picking up her distress and crying the whole way. She found Elias in the barn, told him everything in a rush of words. His face darkened with each detail.
"This brother, he's dangerous. He's mean and spiteful and probably broke."
Rachel said, "Samuel cut him off years ago for drinking and gambling. But dangerous, I don't know." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll go." "What?" "If I leave, take Nathaniel away. He has no cause against you. You keep your land, your life." Rachel stared at him. "You'd do that just leave?" "To protect you, yes." The simple statement broke something in her.
"No,"
she said fiercely.
"No, I've lost too much already. I won't lose you two, either of you."
"Rachel."
"No."
She was crying now, tears she'd held back for years. "I'm tired of losing people, tired of being careful and proper and alone. You want to protect me? Then stay. Stay and help me fight for what's ours." He caught her as she swayed, his arms strong and sure around her. "Ours," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Yes, ours," Rachel said against his chest. "This land, this life we're building. Nathaniel needs both of us, and I need you too." She felt him tremble, this warrior who faced death without flinching. "You don't know what you're saying. The cost—" "I've already paid it," Rachel said, pulling back to look at him. "The town already whispers. My reputation is already gone. But you know what? It's worth it. You're worth it. Both of you." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "You humble me," he said roughly. This courage you have, my people would sing of it."
"I don't need songs," Rachel whispered. "I just need you to stop trying to leave."
His laugh was half sob. "Woman, I stopped trying to leave the night you told Amos Dillard you'd die before letting him harm my son. I just didn't know how to stay."
"Then learn," Rachel said. "We'll learn together."
Standing there in the barn with Nathaniel between them and danger gathering like storm clouds, they made their choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the only choice their hearts would allow. Whatever came next, Josiah's threats, the town's judgment, the uncertain future, they would face it together. A widow, a warrior, and a child who belonged to both worlds, creating a new kind of family in defiance of all convention. As if in benediction, Nathaniel reached up to pat both their faces with his chubby hands, his babbling mixing English and Apache sounds in perfect, innocent harmony.
"See,"
Rachel said, managing a watery smile.
"He knows
we belong together." Elias kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Then together we stay," he promised, "whatever comes." And in that moment, despite all the challenges ahead, Rachel believed him. They would stay, they would fight, and somehow they would make a place for themselves in this unforgiving land. Together. The December wind howled through the canyon like a living thing, driving snow against the cabin walls. Elias had been gone since dawn, hunting in the low country where game still moved despite the early winter storms. Rachel tried not to worry, but as afternoon shadows lengthened with no sign of him, anxiety gnawed at her bones. Nathaniel, now 6 months old and sitting up on his own, played with a wooden horse on a blanket near the fire. He'd grown into a beautiful child with his father's strong features softened by his mother's grace. Rachel watched him, trying to lose herself in his innocent babbling, but her ears strained for the sound of Elias's return. When darkness fell complete and still he hadn't appeared, she knew something was wrong. She was just bundling Nathaniel for a trip to the nearest neighbor when she heard a sound at the door. Not the strong knock of a healthy man, but a scraping, desperate fumbling. Rachel grabbed the rifle with one hand, holding Nathaniel with the other, and cautiously opened the door. Elias collapsed inward, more falling than walking. Blood soaked his left side, and his face was gray with pain and cold. Behind him, his horse stood patient despite its own wound's deep claw marks along its flanks. "Mountain cat," he managed through chattering teeth. "Big male, protecting a kill." Rachel's mind went sharp and clear, the way it always did in crisis. She half carried, half dragged him to the bed, settled Nathaniel safely in his cradle, and turned to assess the damage. The cat's claws had raked deep furrows from shoulder to hip, not fatal if kept clean, but he'd lost blood, and the cold had sapped his remaining strength. "Need to get you warm," she muttered, stoking the fire high before returning to cut away his ruined shirt. The sight of his wounds made her stomach clench, but her hands stayed steady as she cleaned them with whiskey from Samuel's last bottle. Elias hissed through his teeth but didn't cry out.
"The horse—"
"We'll keep," Rachel said firmly. "You first." She worked with the efficiency of long practice, memories of nursing Samuel through his final illness lending her strength. But this was different. This time, she told herself fiercely, the outcome would be different. As she cleaned and bandaged, her hands learned the landscape of his body, the old scars that told stories of survival, the lean strength beneath copper skin, the way his breathing hitched when she touched certain places. It was intimate beyond anything they'd shared, this tending of wounds, this trust he placed in her hands. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough, "if something happens—"
"Nothing's happening except you're going to lie still and let me work," she interrupted. "Save your strength for healing, not farewell speeches."
A ghost of his rare smile crossed his face. "Bossy woman."
"And don't you forget it."
When the wounds were cleaned and dressed, she helped him into one of Samuel's old nightshirts. The sight of him in her late husband's clothes should have felt wrong. But instead it seemed right past and present, merging into something new. She brought him broth and willow bark tea, supporting his head while he drank. His skin burned with fever beginning to take hold, and she knew the next hours would be critical. "Need to tend your horse," she said when he'd finished. His hand caught hers. "Stay." "Elias, please." The word came hard to him. She knew. Apache warriors didn't plead. "Just a moment." She sat on the bed's edge, his hand still holding hers, in the firelight, with shadows playing across his features. She could see both the warrior and the man's strength and vulnerability in equal measure. "That night," he said suddenly, "when you opened your door, I was ready to die. Expected to die, but you—" He squeezed her hand. "You gave us both life again." "You're feverish," Rachel said, though her heart raced. "Rest now." "No, need to say this, in case—" He stopped at her sharp look, then continued differently. "You asked once why I stayed. It wasn't for shelter or safety. It was you. The way you looked at my son like he was precious, not a half-blood burden. The way you stood against your own people for us. The way you make even simple things, making bread. Feeding chickens, seem like small miracles." Rachel's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Elias, I love you." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything. "I know I have no right. Know what it costs you. But you should know. Before—" She stopped his words the only way she could think of, by pressing her lips to his. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd shared with Samuel during their courtship. This was fire and desperation, need and promise all tangled together. His good arm came up to cup the back of her head, holding her close as he kissed her back with a matching intensity. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he whispered against her mouth, "You've set me on fire, love." She felt his fingers clutch at her dress with wild passion, not seeking anything beyond connection, beyond confirmation that this was real. Rachel pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling in the space between. "Don't you dare die on me now," she whispered fiercely. "Not when we finally have this." "Wouldn't dream of it," he murmured, though she could feel him trembling with more than passion. The fever was climbing. She pulled back. Suddenly, all business again. "I need to tend your horse and get more medicine. You rest. That's an order." The next hours blurred together in a haze of activity. Rachel treated the horse's wounds, thankfully more superficial than Elias's, then set about battling for the man she just admitted she loved. She bathed his fever-hot skin with cool water, forced medicine between his lips, held him when delirium made him call out in Apache for people long dead. Nathaniel, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, stayed unusually quiet, watching from his cradle with solemn dark eyes. Near midnight, the fever spiked dangerously. Elias thrashed on the bed, lost in some internal battle Rachel couldn't reach. His skin burned like fire under her hands, and his breathing came harsh and labored. "No," she said aloud, addressing God, fate, or whatever forces govern such things. "No, I've paid enough, lost enough. You can't have him too." She stripped him to the waist again, packing snow around his body to bring down the temperature. He fought her at first, mumbling in Apache, but she held him down with strength born of desperation. "Fight," she commanded him. "You hear me? Elias, fight. Your son needs you. I need you. So you fight this like you'd fight any enemy." Whether he heard her or not, something shifted. His struggles eased, his breathing deepened. The fever, while still high, seemed to plateau rather than climb. Rachel maintained her vigil through the long night, singing softly lullabies for Nathaniel, hymns from her childhood, even attempting the Apache songs Elias had taught her. Her voice grew hoarse, but she didn't stop, creating a lifeline of sound for him to follow back. Dawn came pale and tentative, filtering through frost-etched windows. Elias's fever had broken in the small hours. leaving him weak but lucid. He woke to find Rachel still beside him, one hand on his chest monitoring his breathing, the other holding Nathaniel, who had fussed for attention. "You stayed," he said, voice rough as sandpaper. "Where else would I be?" She tried for tartness, but couldn't hide her relief. "Someone has to keep you from doing foolish things like fighting mountain cats." "Didn't fight, ran, not very warrior-like." "Smart, though. Live warriors are more useful than dead heroes." She checked his bandages, pleased to see no fresh bleeding. "How do you feel?" "Like the mountain cat won." He shifted, wincing, then noticed how close she sat, how natural it seemed. "Last night, what I said was perfect," Rachel finished. "And mutual, in case that wasn't clear." His hand found hers, intertwining their fingers. "What happens now?" It was a question bigger than just them. Their relationship, such as it was, existed in a space outside society's boundaries. No church would marry them. No community would accept them, by all rights and customs. They should part ways once he healed. But Rachel had spent the night fighting for his life, and she was done with what they should do. "Now," she said firmly, "you heal. We get through winter, and we build the life we want, not the one others expect." Simple as that. "No, nothing about this is simple, but it's what I choose. What do you choose?" He brought their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with reverent gentleness. "You, always you, from the moment you opened that door." Nathaniel, apparently feeling left out, reached for his father with demanding sounds. Rachel transferred him carefully to Elias's good side, watching as father and son reconnected. The baby patted Elias's face with enthusiastic hands, babbling what sounded like Papa in 2 languages. "He's talking," Elias said, wonder in his voice. "Been trying to for days. Guess he was waiting for you to wake up and hear it." Rachel smoothed Nathaniel's hair. "He's stubborn like his father, and brave like his—" Elias paused, looking at her with a question in his eyes. Rachel's heart skipped. "Like his mother," she finished softly. "Both of them." They spent the day in quiet recovery, Elias sleeping more than waking, Rachel tending both her patients while managing the household. The intimacy of the night before colored everything, turning ordinary moments weighted with new meaning. When she helped him sit up to eat, their faces came close enough to share breath. When she changed his bandages, her hands lingered longer than necessary. "You're going to spoil me," he said after she'd fussed over him for the 10th time. "Good. Someone should—" She tucked another blanket around him. "Besides, when you're healed, there'll be plenty of work. That fence won't mend itself, and we need more firewood before the next storm." "We," he repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." As evening approached, bringing new snow clouds, a knock at the door shattered their peace. Rachel tensed, reaching for the rifle, but the voice that called out was familiar. "Mrs. Morgan, it's Tom Garrett. I'm alone." Rachel opened the door cautiously. Tom stood there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Ma'am," he said, then noticed Elias on the bed. "Sir, I heard there was trouble with a cat." "News travels," Rachel said dryly. "Yes, ma'am. That's actually why I'm here." Tom shifted his weight. "Josiah Morgan's in town. He's been drinking and talking. Says he's coming out here tomorrow with papers. Planning to force you off the land. Thought you should know." Rachel's stomach dropped. In the crisis with Elias, she'd almost forgotten about Josiah's threats. "He also knows about—" Tom gestured awkwardly between them. "Your situation. Plans to use it as grounds to challenge the will. Says no court will let an Apache-loving woman keep Morgan land." Elias tried to sit up despite Rachel's restraining hand. "How many men?" "Just him and maybe 2 others. But ma'am, if he makes this legal, brings in a judge." Tom shrugged helplessly. Might be worse than guns. After Tom left with thanks for the warning, Rachel sank into the chair, suddenly exhausted. Maybe you were right, she said quietly. Maybe leaving would be... No! Elias's voice was firm, despite his weakness. We run now. We run forever. This is our home. We defend it. You can barely stand. Then I'll sit, but I won't let him drive you away. Not from your land. Not from us. He caught her hand again. You fought for my life last night. Let me fight for yours tomorrow. Rachel looked at him wounded, but unbowed, fierce in his determination to protect what they'd built. Then she looked at Nathaniel, playing happily with his wooden horse, innocent of the storm approaching. Together, she asked. Together, he confirmed. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in temporary peace. But tomorrow would come with its challenges, and they would meet it as they'd learned to meet everything, united in purpose, bonded by choice, and stronger for the love they'd finally acknowledged. Rachel allowed herself one moment of perfect clarity, whatever tomorrow brought. They would no longer face it alone. They were a family now, forged in crisis and tempered by tender moments like these. Let Josiah come with his papers and his hate. He would find more than he bargained for, a woman who'd found something worth fighting for, a warrior who'd found something worth protecting, and a love that transcended every boundary society tried to build. She leaned down to kiss Elias softly, a promise and a seal. Rest now, she whispered. Tomorrow we show them what we're made of. His fingers clutched hers one more time. Wild passion banked a steady flame, but no less intense for its quietness. Together, he murmured again, making it sound like a vow. And in the warm circle of their makeshift family, with winter pressing close outside, it was... Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of winter morning that turned breath to frost and made the desert sparkle like broken glass. Rachel stood at the window, watching the road that wound up from town beside her. Elias sat in a chair, his rifle across his lap. He'd insisted on being up and armed despite his wounds, and she hadn't argued. They both knew what was coming. There, Elias said quietly, his sharp eyes catching movement before hers. 3 riders, maybe 4. Rachel's hands tightened on her own Winchester. She'd spent the pre-dawn hours preparing Nathaniel was safe with the Hendersons, who'd agreed to take him despite the risk to their own standing. The cabin was fortified as best they could manage. Now came the waiting. As the riders drew closer, Rachel recognized Josiah's slouched posture, his weakness for drink evident even in how he sat his horse. With him rode Amos Dillard. Of course, he'd aligned himself with Josiah's cause and 2 men she didn't know, rough-looking sorts with the bearing of hired guns. Stay inside, Elias murmured. Make them come to you. The cabin is defensible. But Rachel shook her head. This is my land. I'll meet them standing on it. She stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. Elias followed, moving stiffly but steadying himself against the doorframe. Together they watched the riders approach. Josiah reined up just outside comfortable shooting range, his bloodshot eyes taking in the scene with malicious satisfaction. Well, the rumors are true. My dear sister-in-law has taken up with a savage. State your business, Josiah, Rachel said, her voice carrying clear in the cold air. He produced a leather portfolio with theatrical flourish. Legal papers. Dear Rachel, challenging Samuel's will on grounds of your moral turpitude and mental instability. No court in the territory will let a woman who consorts with Indians keep property that rightfully belongs to the Morgan family. Samuel left this land to me, Rachel said firmly. His wishes were clear. Samuel's dead, Josiah spat. And you killed him, sure as if you'd put a bullet in him. Him and that baby both. Now you're trying to replace them with this heathen and his half-breed whelp. Elias tensed beside her, but Rachel touched his arm lightly. Samuel died of pneumonia, she said, fighting to keep her voice level. Emily of whooping cough. If I could have traded my life for theirs, I would have, but I couldn't. All I could do was survive and try to honor their memory. Honor, Amos Dillard laughed harshly. You call taking an Apache to your bed honor. I call saving a dying child honor. Rachel shot back. I call standing by those who need help honor. What I don't call honor is bringing hired guns to threaten a woman on her own land. One of the unknown men shifted in his saddle. Nobody said nothing about threatening women, he muttered. Shut up, Collins. Josiah snapped. He focused on Rachel again. Sign the papers, deed the land over peaceful-like, and you can take your Indian and get out. Refuse, and we'll let the courts decide. Either way, you're leaving. Question is whether it's vertical or horizontal. That sounds like a threat to me, Elias said, speaking for the first time. His voice carried the controlled danger of a drawn blade. Josiah's hand moved toward his pistol. I don't talk to savages. Then talk to me, Rachel said, stepping forward. This is my land. Josiah. Samuel worked himself into an early grave to build something here, and I've kept it going alone for 3 years. I've birthed calves in blizzards, fought off wolves, survived drought and flood. You think I'll hand it over because you wave some papers at me? You always were too proud for your own good. Josiah sneered. Samuel should have beat it out of you. The words hung in the air like poison. Rachel felt Elias move, but she was faster, raising her rifle to her shoulder in one smooth motion. Samuel never raised a hand to me in anger, she said, her voice deadly quiet. He was 10 times the man you'll ever be. Now get off my land before I forget I'm a Christian woman. Josiah's face flushed dark red. You'd shoot your own kin. You're not my kin. You're a vulture come to pick at Samuel's bones. And if you take 1 step closer to this cabin, I'll drop you where you stand. The tableau held for a breath. 2, 3. Then Amos Dillard made a fatal error. Whether from impatience or stupidity, he went for his gun. Several things happened at once. Elias, despite his wounds, moved with liquid speed, his rifle coming up and firing in one motion. Amos's hat flew off, creased by the bullet, and he froze with his pistol half drawn. The hired guns reached for their weapons, but stopped as Rachel's Winchester swung toward them. Next one's through your heart. Amos, Elias said conversationally. Your choice. For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Then the man called Collins slowly raised his hands. This ain't what I signed on for, he said. Fighting Apaches in the territories is one thing. Shooting women on their own property is another. Yellow bastard, Josiah snarled. But Collins just shrugged. Maybe so, but I'll be a live yellow bastard. I'm out. He turned his horse and rode away, followed after a moment's hesitation by the other hired gun. Now it was 2 against 2, and Josiah's bravado visibly deflated. This isn't over, he said, trying to salvage some dignity. I'll be back with the law. You do that, Rachel said, and I'll tell them about the still you're running up in Skeleton Canyon, the one Samuel knew about but never reported out of misplaced family loyalty. Josiah's face went white. Running illegal liquor in the territory carried serious penalties. You wouldn't? Try me. Rachel's smile was sharp as winter ice. Samuel's gone, and with him any loyalty I owed you. Come after what's mine again, and I'll destroy you. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the meek sister-in-law he'd expected to browbeat into submission. This was a frontier woman who'd been tempered by loss and strengthened by love. You've changed, he said finally. Yes, Rachel agreed simply. I have. Josiah turned his horse without another word. Amos followed, but not before spitting in their direction. They watched the riders disappear down the trail, dust settling in their wake. Only when they were gone did Rachel lower her rifle, her hands suddenly shaking with delayed reaction. Elias's arm came around her, solid and supportive. You were magnificent, he said softly. I was terrified, she admitted. If they'd called my bluff. It wasn't a bluff. I saw your eyes. You'd have shot to protect what's ours. He pressed a kiss to her temple. My warrior woman. She laughed shakily. We make quite a pair, don't we? A wounded Apache and a desperate widow against the world. I prefer to think of us as two fighters who refuse to yield. He winced slightly, the morning's exertions taking their toll. Though perhaps this fighter should sit down. Rachel helped him back inside, fussing over his bandages and making him rest. But the threat wasn't over. They both knew. Josiah would lick his wounds and try again, perhaps with legal means this time. And the town's animosity hadn't disappeared just because they'd stood firm. The answer to their next move came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, while Elias slept and Rachel was bringing Nathaniel home from the Hendersons, she found Judge Theodore Whitman waiting on her porch. The circuit judge was a tall, austere man with eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be easily fooled. Judge, Rachel said warily, settling Nathaniel on her hip. What brings you out here? Curious situation, Mrs. Morgan, he said, removing his hat. I've got Josiah Morgan in my temporary office, demanding I review your late husband's will. Says you're of unsound mind and low moral character. Rachel's chin came up. And what do you say? I say I prefer to make my own assessments. His gaze took in the tidy homestead, the obvious care in its maintenance. May I come in? Rachel hesitated, knowing Elias was inside, but refusing to show fear. Of course. The judge entered, his sharp eyes immediately finding Elias in the bed. To his credit, his expression didn't change. And you would be the Apache I've heard so much about. Elias met his gaze steadily. I am Elias. This is my son, Nathaniel. The judge settled himself at the table, producing a pipe. Mind if I smoke? Not at all, Rachel said, though her nerves screamed with tension. Judge Whitman lit his pipe with methodical movements, then looked at them both. I've been riding this circuit for 15 years, he said finally. Seen about every kind of human drama there is, but this situation, this is a new one. He pointed his pipe stem at Nathaniel. That child's mother, dead, Elias said shortly. And you, Mrs. Morgan, took them both in. The baby was dying, Rachel said. What else could I do? What indeed? The judge puffed thoughtfully. You know, of course, that the law doesn't recognize unions between whites and Indians. Even if you wanted to marry, no church or courthouse would perform the ceremony. Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks, but met his gaze. We know. And yet here you are, clearly making a life together. He studied them both. Tell me, Mrs. Morgan, what would you say to those who claim you're dishonoring your late husband's memory? Rachel thought carefully. I'd say Samuel would understand. He was a good man who believed in helping others. He would have opened that door just as I did. Even knowing the cost. Especially knowing the cost. Samuel never took the easy path if the hard one was right. The judge nodded slowly. I reviewed his will before coming here. Very clear in its intentions. The land goes to you, with no conditions on remarriage or behavior. He fixed Josiah's claims with a stern look. As for Josiah Morgan's claims of mental instability, I see no evidence. You appear quite sound to me, Mrs. Morgan. Unconventional, perhaps, but the frontier requires unconventional people. Rachel sagged with relief. So Josiah has no claim? Legally none whatsoever. Morally. The judge shrugged. That's between you and your conscience, but I'll tell you this. I've seen too many families torn apart by hate and prejudice. If you've found something worth fighting for here, then fight for it. The law may not recognize your union, but it can't stop you from living as you choose on your own land. He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. Word of advice. Make yourselves less of a target. Keep to yourselves, cause no trouble, and eventually the town will find something else to gossip about. And perhaps Consider the child's future. He'll face challenges enough without adding unnecessary ones. After the judge left, Rachel and Elias sat in contemplative silence. Nathaniel, oblivious to the adult concerns, played happily with his wooden horse. "He's right," Elias said eventually. "About Nathaniel. This life we're choosing, it won't be easy for him." "No life is easy," Rachel countered. "But at least he'll grow up knowing he's loved, that he has a place in both worlds. Neither world may accept him. Then we'll make our own world, right here." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Isn't that what we're already doing?" That evening, as they prepared for another night, Tom Garrett arrived with the news. The confrontation at the cabin had become the talk of the town, opinions sharply divided. Some admired Rachel's courage in standing her ground. Others condemned her choice of who to stand with. But significantly, Josiah had left town, heading south with his tail between his legs. "Don't expect that's the last of him," Tom warned. "Men like that don't forget humiliation easy. But for now, you've got breathing room." As night fell, they put Nathaniel to bed and sat together by the fire. Elias's wounds were healing clean, though he'd carry new scars. Rachel leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "We won today," she said softly. "A battle, not the war," he corrected. "There will be other challenges." "I know." She turned to face him. "But we'll meet them the same way, together." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "You could still have an easier life. Find a white man to marry, be respectable again." "I don't want easy," Rachel said fiercely. "I want real. I want you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, sealing their commitment. When they drew apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "My people have a saying," he murmured, "that some souls are matched before birth, destined to find each other across any distance. I didn't believe it until I met you." "Elias," she whispered, heart too full for words. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Not in their way, with papers and ceremonies they wouldn't allow anyway, but in the old way, the true way. Be my wife in all but law." Rachel's breath caught. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, always yes." That night, under stars that witnessed their vows, they pledged themselves to each other with words in two languages. Creating their own ceremony from fragments of both traditions, they exchanged not rings but promises, his to protect and provide, hers to stand beside him against any storm. When dawn came, nothing had changed in the eyes of the law or society, but everything had changed for them. They were truly family now, bound by choice and consecrated by love that transcended every barrier the world tried to place between them. The battle for their right to exist had been won, at least for now. The war would continue, but they would face it as they had learned to face everything, united, unashamed, and unbreakable in their devotion to the life they were building together. The shot came at sunset 3 days later, shattering the kitchen window and embedding itself in the wall inches from where Rachel stood preparing supper. She dropped to the floor instantly, her heart hammering as a second shot followed. Then a third. "Stay down," Elias commanded from the doorway. He'd been in the barn when the shooting started, and blood seeped through his shirt where his quick movements had torn open the healing wounds. He pressed a rifle into her hands. "Where's Nathaniel?" "His cradle, by the fireplace." Relief flooded through her. The baby was safe, protected by the stone chimney. His frightened cries pierced the air, but at least he was crying. More shots peppered the cabin, coming from multiple directions. This wasn't random violence. It was coordinated, planned. Elias moved with grim efficiency despite his injuries, taking position at the front window while Rachel covered the back. "How many?" she asked, trying to spot muzzle flashes in the gathering darkness. 4, maybe 5. They're staying back, in the rocks." His voice carried cold analysis. "Not trying to hit us. Trying to pin us down.
Josiah?
Has to be. But he's got better help this time.
As if to confirm it, Josiah's voice rang out from the twilight. Last chance. Rachel, sign the papers and walk away, or we burn you out.
Go to hell, Josiah!
Rachel shouted back, then flinched as another volley answered her defiance. That's what I thought you'd say, Josiah called. Boys, light 'em up.
Fire arrows began arcing through the air, not many, but enough. Most fell short or hit the stone portions of the cabin, but one caught in the roof shingles, and another lodged in the chicken coop.
They're trying to smoke us out, Elias said grimly.
He fired twice in quick succession, and someone in the rocks cried out, "Good shot on the coop!" Rachel's mind raced. The cabin's sod roof wouldn't burn easily, but the outbuildings were vulnerable. More importantly, smoke would eventually force them into the open where Josiah's men waited.
The well,
she said suddenly.
If I can get to the well.
You'll be shot before you take 3 steps. Elias moved to check another window. But there might be another way. How much ammunition do we have? Maybe 40 rounds between us.
Not enough for a siege.
He was silent for a moment, calculating. But maybe enough for a bluff. Before Rachel could ask what he meant, he called out in Apache a long, complex series of sounds that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. Then he repeated it, adding what sounded like different voices answering.
"What are you doing?"
Rachel whispered. "Calling my war party," he said with the ghost of a smile. "The one that doesn't exist." Understanding dawned. He was creating the illusion of Apache reinforcements, playing on the attackers' fears. It was brilliant if it worked. For a moment, the shooting stopped. Rachel could imagine the whispered conferences in the rocks, the sudden uncertainty. Then Josiah's voice came again. Less confident now. "A nice try. Indian, but we know you're alone." Elias answered with another call, this one urgent, commanding. He motioned for Rachel to fire from her position while he shot from his, creating the impression of more defenders. She squeezed off 3 quick shots, spacing them as if from different rifles. "The hay barn's catching," one of Josiah's men called out, panic edging his voice. "We need to move before—" His words cut off in a scream. Rachel hadn't fired, neither had Elias, but someone had.
"What the hell?"
Another voice from the rocks.
"Who's shooting? That came from behind us."
More shots rang out, but not at the cabin. The attackers were firing wildly into the darkness behind their positions. Rachel heard horses whinnying, men cursing, the sound of confusion and fear. Then, incredibly, she heard a familiar voice boom out. "Josiah Morgan, this is Judge Theodore Whitman. You're surrounded by legally deputized men. Throw down your weapons or we'll cut you down where you stand." Rachel nearly sobbed with relief. The judge, somehow, with help. But the fight wasn't over. Josiah, drunk on whiskey and desperation, wasn't giving up easily. "It's a trick," he screamed. "Keep shooting!" But his men were already breaking. Rachel saw shadows fleeing through the rocks, heard horses galloping away. Only Josiah remained, still firing wildly at the cabin.
"Damn you, Rachel!"
he screamed.
"This was supposed to be mine, Samuel promised."
His words ended in a grunt. In the sudden silence that followed, Rachel heard boots on gravel, approaching carefully.
"Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Elias."
It was Dr. Webb's voice.
"It's safe now. We've got him."
Rachel's knees nearly buckled as she stood. Elias caught her arm, steadying her, and together they emerged from the cabin. In the dying light, she could see an incredible sight. Judge Whitman, Dr. Webb, Tom Garrett, Reverend Blackwood, and even Mary Henderson's husband John, all armed, all having ridden to their defense. Josiah lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder where a bullet had found him. He glared up at Rachel with hatred that bordered on madness. "Should have been mine," he mumbled. Samuel said if anything happened. Samuel said no such thing. Judge Whitman interrupted sternly. I've seen his will. Remember, he left everything to his wife, clear as day. He looked at the assembled group. You all witnessed this attack. Attempted murder, arson, assault with deadly weapons. Mr. Morgan here is looking at significant prison time. As John Henderson and Tom Garrett hauled Josiah to his feet, Dr. Webb approached Elias. Let me look at those wounds. You've torn them open again. While the doctor worked, Judge Whitman explained their fortunate arrival. Young Tom here rode like the devil to find me after spotting Josiah gathering men at Skeleton Canyon. Figured he was planning something desperate. I deputized these gentlemen, and we rode hard to get here. But why? Rachel asked, still struggling to process it all. Why risk yourselves for us? Reverend Blackwood cleared his throat. Because what's right is right. Mrs. Morgan, you opened your door to a dying child. That speaks to character more than any gossip or prejudice. Besides, Mary's husband added with a wry smile, my wife would have skinned me alive if I'd let something happen to you. She's grown mighty fond of that baby. As they talked, putting out the fires and securing the scene, Rachel noticed other riders approaching townspeople drawn by the gunfire. But instead of hostility, she saw curiosity, even concern. The story would spread quickly. She knew how she and Elias had stood against attack, how respected citizens had rallied to their defense. It wouldn't end all prejudice, but it would shift perceptions. You realize, Judge Whitman said quietly to her, this changes things. Josiah's attack, my intervention, these witnesses, it establishes a precedent. You'll still face challenges, but legally, your position is stronger. Later, after the wounded were tended and statements given, after Josiah had been taken away in chains and the defenders had returned to town, Rachel and Elias sat in their damaged but intact home. Nathaniel slept peacefully, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. We need to talk about what happens next, Elias said, breaking the comfortable silence. Rachel looked at him sharply. If you're thinking of leaving again. No, he caught her hand. Never. But we can't pretend tonight didn't happen. There will be others like Josiah. Other threats. I need to know you understand that. I understand that we survived, Rachel said firmly. That good people stood with us, that we're building something worth defending. He studied her face in the lamplight. You were ready to die tonight. For this land. For us. Weren't you? Yes, but I'm a warrior. It's what I was raised for. You. He shook his head. You continue to surprise me. Rachel moved to sit beside him, careful of his freshly bandaged wounds. I wasn't raised to be a frontier wife either, but we become what we need to become. She touched his face gently. I needed to become someone who could love you, raise Nathaniel, defend our home. So I did. Simple as that. No, nothing simple, but it's clear. She leaned against him. I love you. I love our son. I love this life we're building. That's worth any fight. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds returning to normal crickets. A distant coyote. The whisper of wind through the damaged roof they'd need to repair come morning. The judge was right about precedent. Elias said eventually, tonight will be remembered. The night the town stood with us, even if not all of them meant to. And Josiah, prison, like the judge said, he won't trouble us again. Elias's voice carried grim satisfaction. His own greed destroyed him. Rachel thought about Samuel's brother, consumed by jealousy and hate, willing to destroy what he couldn't have. He was family once. I should feel sorry for him. But you don't. No, he made his choices. She straightened, looking around their home, bullet holes in the walls, broken windows, scorch marks on the roof. We've got work to do tomorrow. We do, Elias agreed. Then, softer, but tonight we're alive. We're together. We won. It was temporary. They both knew. One battle in a longer war against prejudice and hate. But as Rachel rose to check on Nathaniel, as Elias banked the fire against the cold night, as they prepared for bed in their damaged but undefeated home, she felt a surge of hope. They'd been tested by violence and hadn't broken. They'd found unexpected allies willing to stand for justice over prejudice. They'd proven that their unconventional family could survive whatever the frontier threw at them. "Come to bed," Elias said, holding out his hand. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Rachel took his hand, letting him draw her close. "Then we'll face them the same way we faced today." "Together," he finished, sealing the promise with a kiss. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, impartial witnesses to human drama. But inside the cabin, warmth and love created their own small universe. A white woman, an Apache warrior, and a child of two worlds, building something new from the ashes of their respective losses. The war wasn't over, might never be truly over. But tonight, they'd won more than a battle. They'd won recognition, respect, and the right to exist on their own terms. It was enough. It was everything. As sleep finally claimed them, Rachel's last thought was of the sunrise to come. There would be repairs to make, relationships to rebuild, a future to forge from the uncertain present. But they would do it together. And that made all the difference. The frontier had tested them with its worst. Now it was time to build their best. Spring arrived with unexpected fanfare that year of 1869, painting the desert in brilliant splashes of wildflower color. The winter had been hard but survivable, and as Rachel watched Ellis teaching Nathaniel to walk in the meadow behind their cabin, she allowed herself a moment of pure contentment. The attack by Josiah had indeed proven to be a turning point. News of respected citizens defending the unconventional family had spread throughout the territory, carried by travelers and amplified with each telling. While not everyone approved, the violent opposition had largely melted away, replaced by wary acceptance or studied indifference. "Papa!" Nathaniel called out, his chubby legs carrying him unsteadily toward Elias, who caught him with gentle hands. The child was speaking more each day, mixing Apache and English with the casual fluency of one who knew no borders between worlds. Rachel was hanging washing when she saw the rider approaching, not with the aggressive speed of trouble, but with the measured pace of official business. As he drew closer, she recognized him as a federal marshal, his badge glinting in the morning sun. "Mrs. Morgan?" The marshal touched his hat brim respectfully. "I'm Marshal James Corwin. I'm looking for the man called Elias." Rachel's hand tightened on the wet sheet, but she kept her voice steady. "May I ask why?" "Nothing troublesome, ma'am. In fact, quite the opposite." He dismounted, producing an official-looking document. "There's been a treaty signed back in Washington. President Grant's new peace policy. Some of the Apache bands are being offered reservation land with promises of protection and supplies." Elias had approached during this exchange, Nathaniel in his arms. His face was carefully neutral as he listened to the marshal's explanation. "The thing is," Marshal Corwin continued, "we need intermediaries, men who can speak both languages, who understand both ways. Your name came up, Mr. Elias, several times. Actually, seems you have a reputation for being a man of reason." "Who spoke my name?" Elias asked warily. "Judge Whitman, for one. Dr. Webb. Even got a letter from Reverend Blackwood saying you'd be ideal for helping keep the peace." The marshal shifted his weight. "The position comes with federal protection, a stipend, and—" He glanced meaningfully at Rachel. "Official recognition of your household." Rachel's breath caught. Official recognition, it wasn't marriage in the legal sense, but it was acknowledgement, protection under federal authority. Elias was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents the marshal offered. "This reservation where—" "Not far, about 2 days' ride south. The idea is to have liaisons who can move between the reservation and the settlements, preventing misunderstandings before they become violence. And my family, would be under federal protection. Anyone causing trouble for a federal employee's household would answer to the U.S. government. Marshal Corwin's expression was knowing. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a sight better than what you have now. That evening, they discussed it at length. The offer was tempting protection, purpose, a chance to help prevent the kind of violence that had taken Elias's wife. But it also meant obligations, being tied to government schedules and policies. "What do you think?" Elias asked, watching Rachel's face in the firelight. "I think," she said slowly, "that change is coming whether we like it or not. The question is whether we help shape it or get swept along by it." "You wouldn't mind being known as the woman married to the government's Apache liaison?" Rachel laughed. "As opposed to being known as the woman living in sin with an Apache warrior, I think I can manage the scandal." His hand found hers. "This isn't the life you imagined." "No," she agreed. "It's better, harder, stranger, but better." They accepted the position, and within a month, their lives had transformed again. Elias split his time between the reservation and the settlements, working to prevent conflicts and misunderstandings. He wore his authority like armor, using it to protect not just his own family but others caught between worlds. Rachel often accompanied him, bringing medical knowledge to the reservation while learning traditional healing from Apache women. Nathaniel came too, playing with children who looked like him, learning the songs and stories of his father's people alongside the nursery rhymes of his adopted mother's culture. It wasn't without challenges. Some, on both sides, viewed Elias as a traitor, a sellout to the white government. Others resented Rachel's presence on the reservation, seeing her as an interloper. But gradually, through consistent action and genuine care, they built bridges. One hot July day, as Rachel helped deliver a baby in the reservation's makeshift clinic, the grandmother, a woman who had initially refused to acknowledge her, pressed a beaded amulet into her hands. "For protection," the elder said in careful English. "You have good hands, good heart, the baby knows." That evening, Elias found her crying over the simple gift. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," Rachel assured him. "Everything's right. That's why I'm crying." He pulled her close, understanding without words. They'd come so far from that desperate night when he'd pounded on her door with a dying infant. Now they had a place, a purpose, a community fractured and complicated, but theirs. The real test came in September, when a group of young Apache warriors, angry about reduced rations and broken promises, threatened to leave the reservation and raid nearby settlements. The situation was powder-keg tense, with soldiers ready to respond with force. Elias worked tirelessly to mediate, but it was Rachel who provided the breakthrough. She noticed one of the angriest warriors had an infected wound, poorly treated and causing fever that clouded judgment. She convinced him to let her treat it. And as she worked, she spoke quietly about loss, about choosing life over death, about the children who needed their fathers. The warrior, barely more than a boy himself, broke down, the fever and infection having pushed him to the edge. The crisis passed, violence averted by compassion and carbolic acid. "You saved lives today," Elias told her that night. "We saved lives," she corrected. "That's what we do, together." That November brought an unexpected visitor. A woman appeared at their cabin Apache, travel-worn, carrying a bundle. Rachel's heart clenched with sudden fear, but the woman's first words eased it. "I am Morning Song, cousin to Morning Star," she said in accented English. "I have traveled far to see my cousin's son." She'd heard, through the mysterious networks that carried news across vast distances, about Nathaniel's survival and his father's new life. She'd come not to take the child, but to know him, to ensure the stories and songs of his mother's line weren't lost. For a week, Morning Song stayed with them, teaching Nathaniel words in his mother's dialect, showing Rachel how Morning Star had prepared certain foods, sharing with Elias memories of his wife's childhood. On her last night, she performed a ceremony, not Apache exactly, but not white either, a blessing that encompassed all of Nathaniel's heritage, acknowledging Rachel as his mother in all but blood. "My cousin chose well," Morning Song told Elias quietly. "Even in death, she chose well. This woman will raise your son to be strong in both worlds." After she left, Rachel found Elias standing by his wife's grave, a small marker they'd placed on the hill overlooking the cabin. She joined him silently, understanding his need to honor the past while building the future.
"She would be proud,"
Rachel said softly.
"Of you, of Nathaniel,
"Of the life you've built from ashes."
of us,"
Elias corrected, taking her hand.
"The life we've built."
As winter approached again, Marshal Corwin returned with news. The federal government, impressed with Elias's work, was expanding the liaison program. They wanted him to train others, to help establish a network of cultural bridges across the territory. It would mean more travel, the marshal explained, but also more authority, better pay, and he produced another document. "Full federal recognition of your family unit, with all associated protections and benefits." Rachel read through the papers, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't marriage as society defined it, but it was legal acknowledgement of their family, protection under law for Nathaniel's inheritance rights, recognition of her as Elias's partner in all but name. "There's one more thing," Marshal Corwin added. "The government's establishing a school on the reservation. They need a teacher, someone who can help the children navigate both worlds. The position's yours if you want it, Mrs. Morgan." Rachel looked at Elias, seeing her own hope reflected in his eyes. A chance to shape the future, to help children like Nathaniel find their place in a changing world. "We accept," they said in unison, then laughed at their synchronicity. That night, as snow began to fall outside, they celebrated quietly. Nathaniel toddled between them, babbling happily in his mixed language, unaware of the significance of the day's events. But his parents knew. They'd won more than protection or position, they'd won the right to define themselves, to create a new kind of family recognized by law, if not by convention. "We've come far," Elias said, watching Nathaniel play with his carved horse.
"And we've far to go,"
Rachel added. "But we'll go together." He kissed her temple, a gesture so tender it still made her heart skip. "No other way I'd have it." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the desert in temporary white, but inside their cabin, warmth and love created a sanctuary against any storm. They'd fought for this through prejudice and violence, through loss and fear, through the 1,000 daily challenges of lives that didn't fit any mold. Now, with federal protection and purpose, with acceptance earned through action rather than granted by birthright, they could focus on building rather than just surviving. The school Rachel would teach at, the peace Elias would help maintain, the life Nathaniel would grow into, all of it stretched before them like a promise. The frontier was changing, and they were changing with it. But some things remained constant: the love that bound them, the courage that sustained them, and the unshakable belief that families were made by choice as much as by blood. As they prepared for bed, Nathaniel sleepy in Rachel's arms, Elias paused by the window. "Look," he said softly. The snow had stopped, and stars emerged between breaking clouds. One particularly bright star seemed to hover over their small homestead, a beacon in the darkness. "Morning Star," Elias murmured, the English translation of his first wife's name. "Watching over us still." Rachel joined him at the window, shifting Nathaniel so they could both hold him. "All of us," she said firmly. "One family, under all the stars." And in that moment, with the vast frontier sky above and their small, warm home below, everything felt possible. They'd earned their place through blood and tears, through courage and compassion. Now it was time to live the life they'd fought so hard to claim. Together, always together. 1 year later, on a crisp spring morning in 1870, the impossible happened. Reverend Daniel Blackwood stood before a small gathering in the meadow behind Rachel and Elias's cabin. a worn Bible in his hands and defiance in his aged eyes. "I've prayed on this matter considerably," he announced to the assembled group. "And I've come to understand that God's love knows no boundaries of race or tradition. What he has joined through trial and devotion, let no man tear asunder." It wasn't a legal ceremony. No territory in America would recognize it. But with federal protection secured and hearts already bound, Rachel and Elias had decided to formalize their union in the only way that mattered to them before friends who'd stood by them and under the sky that had witnessed their journey. Rachel wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit and adorned with Apache beadwork that Morning Song had sent. Elias stood tall in a mix of traditional dress and frontier formal wear, Nathaniel tottering between them in a miniature version of his father's outfit. The witnesses were few but precious Judge Whitman, who'd bent law to protect them, Dr. Webb and his wife, Mary Henderson, bouncing her newest grandchild, Tom Garrett with his young bride, and, surprisingly, several Apache families from the reservation, including the warrior whose life Rachel had saved. "Do you, Rachel Morgan, take this man as your husband, to stand beside through whatever storms may come?" Reverend Blackwood asked, his voice carrying across the meadow.
"I do," Rachel said firmly, her eyes never leaving Elias's face. "I have and I will."
"And do you, Elias, take this woman as your wife, to protect and cherish, in the manner of your people and hers, until the mountains crumble," Elias replied, speaking the traditional Apache vow in English, "until the last star falls." When Reverend Blackwood pronounced them husband and wife, in the eyes of God and this gathered community, the small crowd erupted in celebration. Nathaniel clapped his hands, understanding joy if not ceremony, and called out, "Mama Papa," in delighted recognition. The celebration that followed blended traditions as thoroughly as their daily lives did. Apache drums mixed with frontier fiddles. Traditional food sat beside church potluck favorites. Children of both cultures played together while their parents, slowly and carefully, built bridges over centuries of mistrust. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, Rachel found a moment of quiet with Elias. They stood together watching their guests, this unlikely family forged from adversity. "No regrets?" Elias asked, his arm around her waist.
"Only one," Rachel admitted. "That Samuel and Emily couldn't see this. They would have loved you, loved what we've built."
"They do see," Elias said with quiet certainty. "They live on in the love you've given Nathaniel, in the home that sheltered us. Their memory is honored here." As if summoned by his name, Nathaniel ran to them, his face painted with berry juice and happiness. "Dance, Mama Papa, dance!" They joined the celebration, moving to music that belonged to no single tradition but somehow belonged to all. And as night fell, bringing out the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting on a storm-torn night, Rachel felt the perfect rightness of this moment. The school opened a month later. Rachel stood before her first-class 12 children ranging from 5 to 15, Apache and white and mixed, all watching her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. "Good morning," she said in English, then repeated it in Apache. "Today we begin learning together, not just letters and numbers, but how to build bridges with words instead of burning them with fear." It wasn't easy. Some parents on both sides objected. Some children had been taught hate before they could properly walk. But Rachel persisted, teaching with the same steady determination that had carried her through everything else. Elias's work prospered too. His reputation as a fair mediator grew, preventing countless conflicts through patient negotiation. He trained other liaisons, creating a network of understanding across the territory. Not everyone approved. Some saw him as a traitor to his people, others as a dangerous savage playing at civilization. But results spoke louder than prejudice, and gradually, the peace held. Their own family grew in unexpected ways. A young Apache girl orphaned by disease came to live with them, becoming Nathaniel's sister in all but blood. They named her Hope Esperanza in Spanish, as a nod to all the cultures mixing in their corner of the frontier. 2 years later, Rachel gave birth to twins, a boy and girl, with their father's dark hair and their mother's determined chin. They named them Samuel and Morningstar, honoring the past while building the future. The cabin expanded into a proper house, with rooms added as needed and a library that served the whole community. Their table rarely sat just their family. There were always visitors, students, people seeking mediation or medical help, or simply a place where differences were celebrated rather than condemned. Not everything was peaceful. There were still those who couldn't accept their family, still moments of danger and prejudice. When Nathaniel was 7, he came home from town with a black eye, having fought boys who called him names. "They said I don't belong anywhere," he told his parents, trying not to cry. "Not white, not Apache, not anything." Rachel held him close while Elias knelt to meet his eyes. "You belong everywhere," his father said firmly. "You carry the strength of two peoples. That makes you bridges, not barriers." "But it hurts," Nathaniel whispered. "Yes," Rachel agreed. "Building bridges often does, but look what we've built by refusing to give up." She gestured around their home at Hope practicing her letters, at the twins playing with carved animals, at the stream of visitors who found welcome here regardless of origin. "This is your inheritance," Elias added. "Not just land or possessions, but the knowledge that love is stronger than hate, that families are made by choice, that different can be beautiful." Years flowed like water in the desert, sometimes scarce, sometimes flooding, always precious. The children grew strong and sure, educated in both worlds, comfortable in their own skins. The school became a model, visited by educators from across the territory. Elias's mediation work became official territorial policy, saving countless lives through prevention rather than military action. On their 10th anniversary, counted from that night, Elias first knocked on her door. They stood again in the meadow where they'd married. Children played around them, their own 4+, a shifting group of students and foster children who found temporary or permanent homes under their roof. "Did you imagine this?" Elias asked, gesturing at their abundant life. "That night in the storm?" "I imagined nothing beyond the next breath," Rachel admitted. "I was so broken, so lost. I thought I was just trying to save your son. I didn't know I was saving myself too." "We saved each other," Elias corrected, "and built something new from the pieces." Judge Whitman, now retired but still a frequent visitor, often said their family was like the territory itself, rough and smooth, ancient and new, seemingly impossible but stubbornly real. "You've shown that America's future doesn't have to be about choosing sides," he told them once. "It can be about choosing each other." Their influence rippled outward like stones in still water. Other mixed families found courage in their example. The school produced students who could navigate both worlds with confidence. The peace Elias helped maintain allowed for growth and understanding that violence would have destroyed. When the railroad finally came through, bringing easier travel and communication, it also brought journalists curious about the unusual family they'd heard about. One reporter from back east spent a week with them, following Rachel as she taught, watching Elias mediate a water rights dispute, observing their children move seamlessly between languages and cultures. "How do you answer those who say your family shouldn't exist?" the reporter asked at week's end. Rachel and Elias exchanged glances, a lifetime of shared understanding in that look. "We exist," Rachel said simply. "That's answer enough." "We more than exist," Elias added. "We thrive, we love, we build. What more answer does anyone need?" The article, when published, sparked debate across the nation. Letters poured in, some hateful, some supportive, many simply curious. Rachel read them all to her students, using them as lessons in rhetoric, in fear, in hope. Now, as 1870 drew to a close and a new decade beckoned, they gathered for evening circle, their family tradition where each person shared the day's best moment. Nathaniel, now 8 and thoughtful beyond his years, spoke of helping a younger student understand fractions. Hope, 6 and fierce, described tracking a rabbit with her father. The twins, toddling and verbal, babbled about butterflies and cookies. And you, Elias asked Rachel, what was your best moment? She looked around the circle at the man who'd arrived desperate and bleeding, now her partner in all things, at the children who bore the best of multiple worlds, at the home built from love and stubbornness and faith in tomorrow. This, she said simply. Right now, this. As stars emerged overhead, constant witnesses to their journey, Rachel felt the truth of it. Every hardship had led here, every choice, every stand, every moment of reaching across divides had built this a family that proved love could conquer fear, that courage could reshape the world one heart at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The frontier was changing rapidly, and change always carried risk. But tonight, in the warm circle of their chosen family, surrounded by the life they'd built from ruins and determination, Rachel knew they'd face whatever came the way they always had. Together, always together. The owl called from the cottonwood, a blessing in Apache tradition. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. And in a house built on the borderlands between worlds, a family that shouldn't exist by any conventional measure continued to thrive, love, and light the way for others brave enough to follow. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Rachel and Elias's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories that explore the untold romances and adventures of the Old West. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover this story of love conquering all boundaries.